Shadows are the unsung tool of photography, and with shadows comes contrast. Contrast gives shape and form and texture to images. It breathes life into them. But how do you know when you've pushed your contrast too far? We've got Alex Webb here, and we're going to look at how to use contrast with confidence. The reason I've chosen Alex to get started with is because I want to show you, before we get into how to use contrast, a photographer who employs contrast to great effect. As you go through his pictures, you notice that a lot of them have very inky black shadows. So this is Alex understanding that dark shadows can contrast visually very nicely with colors, that they can hide things, that they can make suggestions without being blunt, that they can calm down what might be a very otherwise busy image. Too little contrast, your image is just, it's flat. Sometimes that's what we want. But too much contrast, and sometimes that image becomes too loud, it becomes too in your face. So I've got some approaches I'm going to share with you, my own work, that will give you more of an idea about answering that question of, like, how much contrast you actually need in your pictures. So how do we know how much contrast is too much? Well, let's have a look at this particular image here. This is out in West Virginia, stopped at a farm store. It's been raining a bit. The sky's a little bit overcast. So the colors are nice and they're poppy. And there's color contrast anyway. Look at the oranges against the gravel and the gray of the palette. Spot on, looking awesome. Now, what I've done is I've made a curves adjustment layer here in Photoshop, and I'm just going to bring down that. Right, because people go, oh, maybe you want to bring out the color of the pumpkins. Now look at that, you can sort of see going crazy. That for me feels like it's too much contrast. Now, why would I say that? Why would I say this is too much? Well, first of all, this feels really hot. These pumpkins now feel like they're made out of acid, right? It's too much, right? It's over vibrant. But in the opposite way, if we go and take that contrast down, just open this up a bit, open up the shadows, it loses some vibrancy. So that would be the first thing I would look at, is, does this actually feel right for the image? We just want just a scooch of contrast here, I think, because there's naturally a decent amount of contrast in the image itself. But that's, of course, not the be-all and end-all of contrast. There's something else that it does, I think, is really important, especially for my photographs. So very briefly, this chat was inspired by a guy on the TPE tribe who put into the weekly feedback sessions, and he asked about how much contrast is too much. It was a wonderful photograph of a skyscraper in New York, and we had a long discussion about it, and it seemed like a lot of people were of a similar opinion. They're wondering about how much of a role contrast plays in their photographs. And if you're interested in joining us to see what we're up about, getting access to all the courses that I've put out over the years, all that kind of good stuff, then there's a link in the description box below to the TPA tribe. It's coming up on 1 year anniversary. So do come and check us out. This is a 7-day free trial. What do you got to lose? See you then. Back to the contrast. This is a photograph of Cambridge North Station, actually. And it's quite up my alley in terms of the angles and shapes. But look at the image itself. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on. There's all these bits and bobs going across, the things, the patterns. And it is quite busy. Now, if I just whack down the contrast and I go to an extreme, I'm going to pull this all the way back. Look what's left. There's just that white piece of the bridge going over the railway tracks, and then that beautiful red brick building in the background, which all of a sudden has assumed massive importance in the image, whereas when it was taken, it wasn't there at all. Look at that, right? That's amazing. That's one of this is why I say shadows are unsung heroes here. The shadows themselves, If we take the shadow down, it hides all of the other stuff. This actually works. Unlike the pumpkins, where the subject matter doesn't really suit that idea, here the subject matter suits really contrasty. If I open up the shadows, and you can see, right, that there's a lot of detail in there that we don't necessarily want. It doesn't really add anything to the picture. So shadows have this wonderful ability just to hide things. And you'll also notice, even though I just kind of pull it down, what happens to the color of the brick? Look at that, right? Now, obviously, it changes a bit because we're taking out some detail in its own shadows, but it will also become darker. Sort of darker. It would also become brighter, more saturated, apparently, when it's contrasted against something dark. Look at Alex Webb's photographs again. Notice what happens when you have the colors next to the shadows. Recently, I was down in London with the chaps from Frames, Tomash and Scott and Cynthia and a whole bunch of. We went to the Barbican Centre to go and take some photographs. Now, I've not been there before, but it's like totally up my alley. I love angles, I love light and shadow, I love brutalist architecture, all this kind of stuff. So I was like, yeah, this is going to be so cool. And I wanted to share with you what happens when I'm out looking around, because to understand how much contrast is too much or too little, we need to kind of get a grasp on where we are as photographers. And what I'm looking for when I'm out and about is this example here. Look at this. This is like a stairwell thing. Everything's so cool about it. You know, the angles, look at that light coming in from the back. There's shadows on there. It's fantastic. Now, what I have here, I've loaded into Snapseed because this is what I use. What I love about this is that I'm going to see how the contrast looks, and it's going to be a surprise. It's going to be the same sort of feeling that I had when I was in the darkroom back in the day, getting the negatives develop, seeing the print come alive under the safe light. All that kind of stuff is great. So what I'm going to do is I've made my process. I hit it like that. Boom. Okay, I can see straight away. See the difference, how it's changed. Now I'm looking at this and going, okay, in terms of the contrast, what's happened now that I've put on this black and white and now that I've made it contrastier? What were the things that are in this photograph that you can't see anymore when I make it contrasty? So something that immediately jumps to mind is you look at the glass barrier around the edge. I like the way that the white has burnt that out. I've taken out an element in the images that is distracting. Things that are now jumping out at me, it's those two beams of light. It's the sweep of the staircase coming down over top of it. That looks fab. I absolutely dig that. But of course, contrast isn't just about dramatic images. Lots of dark, broody photographs where shadows overwhelm and hide everything. We can also do the same thing in the opposite direction. Now, here is a photograph taken at a Shell station, actually, a couple of years ago. Look at that. Buy time for jet spray to clean your car. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play around a little bit with this in Snapseed. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to play with the contrast. Now, here you get a chance, right? I'm going to make this photograph not contrastier, but flatter, because this is not about a dramatic feel. This is not about shape and form and motion and angles and stuff like this. This is more one of those kind of matter of fact, straight down the line, Stephen Shaw-esque kind of photographs. We don't want lots of vibrancy in the picture. So the contrast, I've brought it down just a little bit. So that's kind of looking quite nice. I like that. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to brighten up just a scooch, right? Just that's And you can see what I'm doing here. As I'm going through this, I'm trying to find something that feels right for me. I can't stress this enough. When I'm putting these things together and I'm processing, it's not that I sit there and go, oh, I've got very specific things I'm going to do. It's about playing with the sliders, playing with the process to end up with something that ties into the feeling that somewhat resonated with you when I took the picture. Now, some people might say, hey, Alex, you're full of yourself talking about all this kind of nonsense. It's like art, and all you're doing is just, you're like a button masher. Well, I'm going to counter that, because I'm going to get a little bit soapbox here, right? People talk about just playing with things with haphazard, with random ideas, and then you're not really a photographer because you didn't go in with the process and you don't have it all just like up in your head. Experimentation, just as much as you can experiment out in the field, taking pictures and fiddling with all your exposures, going into the digital darkroom and trying this stuff out. There's no shame in it. I absolutely have no problem whatsoever with doing all this kind of stuff. And we did talk in London about the guys who were like, oh, the get it right in camera crowd. And that, I mean, I appreciate where people are coming from. And I do think that you do need to understand what's happening in your camera. But no photographer in the history of the world, apart from the guys at the beginning who just kind of like it was a thing, right, have just taken a picture of camera so like it's done. Ansel Adams said, the negative is the score, the musical score, and the print is the way that it's played. And you can have the same score and you can play the notes with a different feel. And I love that. And that's why I love what we can do today. And that's why things like Snapseed, it makes it simple, it makes it easy. I'm not sponsored by Snapseed, of course. I just find it a wonderful tool for me to use. Now, I just up the vibrancy just a little bit. And actually, this now feels a lot better. So I've taken the contrast in the other direction. Just moved it back, just nice and calm, because that's what I want. I want to show the details. I don't want to hide things. If you're confused about where to go with the contrast, then you say, okay, what am I going to do here? How am I going to decide what the feel is for the shot? What would you do with a picture like this? What do I see here to begin with? Because again, this is slightly outside of my wheelhouse for what I normally photograph. So I'm thinking what jumps out of me immediately. The blue, the yellow, a little bit of white there. I'm actually feeling some contrast would lean in to what's working here. So let's try some contrast. We'll bring the contrast in. The best thing about Snapseed is free. Just even better, right? So there we can see, if I go back and forth, that's very flat. Okay, that may appeal to you. That might be feeling like that's kind of cool. But I like the color. So if I up the contrast, it's going to, remember, enhance the colors because I'm making the things darker against the background. Now, somebody in the notes will say, oh, but things like, doesn't matter. For the sake of our purposes, look at those colors. I haven't had to muck with the saturation, anything like that, right? And I've just got like all this kind of stuff. Maybe a bit of all, because it does feel a bit cold. So again, I'm going to play around. Now, what do you think is going to happen if we go to black and white on this? This is again where we're training our eye to see things as we start looking at what, and that's why if I'm out there with my phone, I kind of look at it. I've got a rough idea of how it's going to look. So I'm looking at this. The dark shadows, they're going to go black, right? So that's one thing. The blues, I'm not entirely sure about this tone of blue, but I think this is going to become very contrasty very quickly. So if I take the saturation down, and I know this is not about how you normally make a black and white image, but let's look at that, right? Actually, it's not too bad in terms of contrast. And if I whack that contrast all the way up, right, that's too much. Now, why do you think I might say that's too much contrast? It's hiding things, like I said, I like doing, but I feel that the scene is too busy for it. By hiding a lot of that stuff, it's highlighting the little lights. There's a little hotspot down in the bottom left corner. The lampshade itself has disappeared into the background. It's like, oh, there we go. So it's like a little bit of contrast, not too much, just a scooch. That's why I would encourage you just to play around, muck about. You've seen what I'm doing here. This is how I've ended up with the look and the feel for the images that I like, and you will too. If you just remember, hey, you know what? I'm going to have a little bit of contrast, and I'm going to play around to see what happens. Are the shadows helping? Are they adding to the story? Does the image become stronger if we block out those shadows? When you make those shadows dark, do they become cool framing elements? If we open up the shadows, do we take a lot of the drama out of the photograph? And by doing so, make it feel mundane, make it feel everyday in a way that has the impact of a damp flannel, but that's because that's what we want from the image. The answer to how much contrast is too much, like a lot of things in photography, is it depends. It depends on the subject matter. It depends on what you're trying to do. It depends on how you feel. It depends on the final image. But the way to get comfortable with it is to follow this process, to go back and forth, try things out, try shooting in different environments. Get a feel for how all these elements work together. And most importantly, how they all work together for you and your own photographic eye. Now, thank you ever so much for watching. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here. And yeah, I will see you soon. All right. Cheers.